All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, to our next NEACT Summer PD session with Ashley McNeil, who's talking about study habits in general chemistry with a COVID cohort. I'm Kristen Vanderveen, and I'm the president of NEACT, and I'm glad to see all of you here today. And let me just do a quick introduction of Ashley. Ashley, she, her pronouns, is an assistant professor of chemistry and the director of pre-health professions advising for Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts, where she spends her days teaching chemistry survey, general chemistry, and occasionally analytical chemistry to droves of future health professionals, none of whom are chemistry majors. Her research background is in computational physical chemistry, meaning that she prefers her chemistry virtual rather than on a bench. And this is an event from the New England Association of Chemistry Teachers. And if you're not already a member, we do hope that you will consider joining us for future events and also joining the group at NEACT.org. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley.
Awesome. Thanks. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining today. As mentioned, my name is Ashley. I'm really excited to be here with you and to talk about study habits, but also just the general weirdness that I've observed with the COVID cohort, as we've been calling it in my department at Springfield College. So let's get into it. Hopefully it'll be affirming for everybody because it's been a weird couple of years. Yeah. So before we get started, in the chat, just throw in something in there about how you studied for science classes when you were in school, whether it was when you were in high school, when you were in college. Me personally, I never studied in high school, so it was an awakening when I got to college and actually needed to do that. But yeah, what kind of things did you do? What kind of notes did you take in class? How did you prepare for exams? Cool. So I'm seeing people say they wrote lots of notes. That was definitely me. I figured out that I learned best by rewriting things physically, right? Practice problems. Yep. Notes. Right. So a lot of that for us, I would venture to say, traditionally is pencil and paper writing things, right? Studying a little every day. That's good habits. My students learned that the hard way. Practice problems. Good. Yeah. So the students we have today don't do any of that voluntarily. It's interesting, right? So when we think of studying, we think of pencil and paper, kind of an on your own thing, right? Maybe doing some group work, working through problems or talking about concepts, but largely unplugged, right? That's our background. I'm sure, as you know, this generation, they're not like us. That's a really obvious statement, right? So I say it with, with tongue in cheek a little bit, right? But they're fundamentally studying differently, right? They're using technology, which is an obvious statement, I'm sure, but a lot of their time is screen time. And maybe they write things down, but usually not, especially by the time they get to my classroom. Many of them feel like writing on paper is archaic. They want to take notes on their iPad so that they can organize it and reprint it later. They want to type notes on their laptops, which in chemistry, not always super easy to do because of structures and formulas and things, right? But also there are a lot of studies coming out about Generation Z being much more focused on that collaborative effort, right? They're going to talk to each other. They're going to try to work together to figure out what's going on in their courses. And there are tons of studies coming out about the education profile or like the personal profile of Generation Z. Maybe it's just me, but I never realized that people are doing this kind of research on how each of the generations learns. I've attended some professional development this summer that talked a lot about like Generation Z, like how do we talk to them, right? Maybe as a millennial, maybe I'm just early on in my, my pedagogy, but I had no idea that there was so much research out there about how to best communicate with these different generations. So I find that really interesting. It's definitely something I'm reading more about, but there are just some factors here that I think are important when we're talking about educating these students, right? They're much more social. They have much higher social needs, especially because they grow up in a world where they have constant access to social media in their hand all the time, right? They're always talking to each other. They do pretty much everything together. They tend to be multitasking, right? They have a lot of things going on at the same time. And in my personal interactions with them, many of them are very transactional. They aren't going to college just for the college experience. They are there to work towards getting a job. They want to do what needs to be done to achieve their goals, and that's it. And even sometimes my office hours interactions are very transactional like that. Like, I need to get this grade, and you just need to tell me what to do to get there. And as educators, we know that's not really the idea. That's not the point, right? We would much rather them engage in the learning for learning's sake. So somewhere we've got to find a middle ground. Somewhere we've got to find that middle ground. And that's particularly interesting for me as someone who does not have any chemistry majors, right? Nobody's in my class because they want to learn chemistry. So it's been something. The interesting thing about this generation, because they're so technology bound, is that it's a great it's a great opportunity to expand into new ways of delivering that content to them. And the pandemic, awful, but kind of gave us an opportunity as well to kind of stretch what we've been doing as far as traditional learning in the classroom. So I found that an exciting opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about the setup of my class before we get into how I've been kind of getting their feedback to adjust to what they need. So in Introduction to General Chemistry at Springfield College, it's a 2-semester class, right? Very traditional subject material throughout. Before I was hired, so I was hired in the fall of 2020. Before that, it was already a flipped lecture. So it was pretty straightforward, actually, to do that completely virtually my first year teaching. I recorded videos, I posted them on our LMS. We use Brightspace. The students are supposed to watch that video or those smaller videos before coming to my lecture. And then in lecture, which is a normal 50-minute class meeting, right? We're going to do a couple of things. One thing we do is some like warm-up questions is what I call them. And so we use something called active chemistry now, which was called Chem 101, but they just changed their name because they've added math support. And so it's like 3 questions at the beginning of class, maybe one of them about what we talked about last class, maybe 2 of them about what was in the videos they were supposed to watch, right? And I'll come back to that because, as some of you mentioned earlier when we were chatting, they're not necessarily doing the things that we're asking them to do. But anyway, one big thing that I do in my class, and I did all year long last year, is use Jamboard, which I'm going to show you in just a second, sort of as a little something you can try out. To get that active feedback from them, right? So one of the big complaints about the flipped lecture from the students is that if they have a question while they're watching the video, there's no way for them to ask me the question right then, which I disagree, right? You can email me anytime. I answer my emails way more than a healthy person should, to be honest. But this gave them another way to just like quickly drop a question. If there's a homework question they're struggling with, drop it on the Jamboard, and then I can take a look at it and address that in class. And then finally, the idea is any other questions they have about content we can do in class. If there are no questions, right, we can do an activity or something enriching, do more bonus problems so that they can get lots and lots of practice working the problems that they need to master in order to move on to their higher classes in biology or organic chemistry, right? So this is the idea. Yeah, in general. So about my students, largely they're first year freshmen. We have biology majors and what we call sports biology, which is actually human biology. But if you've ever heard of Springfield College, you're probably aware that we're really, really sports focused. We are the birthplace of basketball. The person who invented volleyball was a graduate from Springfield College. Also, if you're a fan of wrestling, John Cena is a graduate of Springfield College. So anyway, we call it sports biology just because we're Springfield. It's really just human biology. The plant classes are just replaced by like kinesiology, right? So we have freshmen in those majors coming in. We also have some health sciences majors who are in the accelerated PA program, PT program. We occasionally get an environmental major, but that's a pretty small major in our department. Almost all of my students, 60 seats in a class, right? I teach 2 sections a semester. Almost all of them are pre-health of some sort. And we do not have a chemistry major. So one benefit is that at least there is that unity and an interest in health. So that helps me when I'm thinking about what activities I want to do, things like that. But yeah, so no chemists in the room but me. I like to tell them that I love chemistry enough for all of us, so it's going to be fine. All right, so Jamboard. I definitely want to share this with you. I wanted to make sure I could bring something today that if you haven't used it yet, it's a tool that I find really, really fun for the students and useful for me. So this is an example of a Jamboard here. It is in Google Suites. So I'm pretty sure everyone has access to it if you have Google Suites as part of your, like if your work emails through Google, that kind of thing. Basically, what I do is for every chapter and for every exam, when we do exam reviews, I set up a Jamboard where I ask, and it's open 24 hours a day, the whole time they're doing the modules and their homework, what is confusing for you? And so if you look here, you might notice that like several of them are specific homework questions. So when I'm rearranging their little Post-it notes, I tend to just make piles of the things that are similar, right? So these are all homework questions. They have, you know, some conceptual questions, like this was our acid base unit in Gen Chem 2. So how do you go from Ka to Kb, or how do you find pH from that, right? I tend to pick a color for me. So in this one, no one was using pink. So my notes are in pink. Dr. M would be me, right? And so for some of them, I can quickly tell them like, yes, that this is correct. Or yeah, we'll talk about that in class on Friday. So I am acknowledging that we're going to discuss it. I'm going to work through that example with you. You're going to see all the details, right? So I found this super useful and the students used it a lot. I also find it helps them because I told them if you get on here and someone else has asked your question, just edit their sticky note and put like ×2, ×3, right? And so that gives them this sense of camaraderie. It confirms for them that they're not the only one struggling. At the same time, it gives me an idea of prioritizing, right? This is something more people are willing to admit that they're having trouble with. So I really need to spend some time clarifying that. Okay. All right. So I have set up a Jamboard for us to practice on. So this is not going to take a lot of time out of the presentation, but I did want to give you a chance to kind of poke around and see what it's all about. So if you would click that link, it'll take you to the Jamboard. And I've set up 3 pages. So let me share. Well, no, if you're pulling it up, then you can see it, but I'll share because maybe not everyone will want to. Okay, so the Jamboard looks like this, right? So I have 3 slides. If you click this top button, you can see all the slides you've set up. You can click the plus signs to add slides if you want to. You can close that and just use the arrows to go back and forth if you want to. And then I just wanted to give you some opportunities to try some of the tools. So if you see the little green circle, I had a green circle there, but that was me, right? So you can use the pen to kind of draw where you are. And that's fun. There's also other pen tools. If you click that, there's like a highlighter and a brush and some other things. On the next slide, you can write a sticky note. So that is the fourth symbol on that left bar. As you can see, I put my sticky note here of what I like. You can choose your color for the sticky note, anything like that you want to do. Tell me what kind of chemistry you teach. And then on the third slide, you can add images. So the fifth button on that left bar is add image. You can either add something from your desktop if you have memes handy, or you can do Google image search, that kind of thing, and load a meme if you would like to, or a joke of some kind. So I'm going to let you play with that for a little while. And at the end of the presentation, I'll come back and we'll just take a look at if anything funny happened. I will tell you, my students love when I just give them free time, like in class. Sometimes this is how I'll get them to work in groups, or kind of submit their ideas anonymously. That's really important to a lot of them because they're very shy about feeling like they're wrong in front of all their peers. So it's a great way for them to get in there, put their ideas out there. No one needs to know who said what, right? And I think it really lowers the stress level of interacting with me, interacting with each other. So yeah, I recommend checking it out if you are interested in using that in your classes. So while you guys are playing with that, I'll talk a little bit about the COVID cohort, which is what my colleagues and I have been calling our incoming students for the past year or so, right? COVID's been a weird time for all of us. So many of us were at home for a year or more. For our students, that meant they were by themselves a lot of the time. They were trying to work on their own. Many of them have told me that they actually had quite a few one-on-one meetings with their professors, their teachers in high school. And they kind of got into that one-on-one feedback. So I actually have a lot of students who come to my office very comfortable with talking to me, which in my experience is not really normal for first-year freshmen. Many of them traditionally were intimidated by spending that one-on-one time with the professors. Also, I work really hard to not seem intimidating, so maybe it's that. But yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about some of the strengths and challenges as far as what I've observed. Again, willingness to talk to me one-on-one, super strength, right? They are not shy. They are very blunt about how they feel, especially when you give them the option to be anonymous, because they are denizens of the internet, right? They are used to that kind of flexibility, that kind of anonymity, so that they can express what they think about something, almost like a knee-jerk reaction sometimes, which is maybe not the most mature way. But anyway, they are quick to tell you how they feel. But again, that may also be because I try very hard to make my office and my classroom a place where you can tell me the truth, right? Do they all? Also, they're super resourceful. This can be spun in a positive or a negative light, right? So especially in the time of online coursework, were they performing academic integrity the way we would traditionally want them to? I don't know. Some of them, sure. Some of them, maybe not. But they definitely got good at finding ways to get to an answer. I'll put it that way. They're really good at finding things online to help them. They're really good at working together on things. And so honestly, I lean into that and tell my students, like, go for it. Like, I want you to work together. A lot of their homework through active, or what used to be Chem 101, is the numbers in the problems, right, are randomly generated. So they can't just plug in the same number. But I tell them, work on it together. Get a strategy for how to solve it together. I'm good with that. I encourage that, right? Some of their challenges, though, very, very poor math background. I know in the questions that some of you submitted, many of you asked about these kinds of challenges. Do I see them too? Absolutely. And many people I've talked to, not only in science, but other fields, are seeing similar things. Very bad at anticipating how long it takes them to get things done. Being home and having wavy deadlines or no deadlines has made it really, really hard for them to time themselves on assignments. We struggled, not just me, but all of the professors in my department struggled with the first year freshmen when it came to taking tests, because 50 minutes is a nonsensical time period to them. So I get in the habit of putting like the clock, the world clock up, so they know at 8:50 at the end of our class, or 10:50 if they're in that class, that's when the exam is over. That does not help them at all. If anything, it only raises their anxiety, which is another major issue. Also, and maybe this is a little typical, honestly, of college freshmen, but they have really unrealistic expectations for their workload. Many of my first year freshmen come in, especially I advise students too academically, and many of them come in before classes even start, and they're like, I'm going to be honest with you, I did like 20 minutes of work a day to finish my senior year of high school online. So I have no discipline, no habits built up of studying hard. So that's going to be hard for me. Again, blunt, great. That's something we can work on, but college is not going to be like that, right? You have to try like at least this much, right? So yeah, but the math background in particular was really, really apparent to me, especially as a chemistry professor this past year. It was even our best students, our students that we typically expect to be extremely high achieving. For example, we have a very competitive accelerated PA program. Typically, those students are the cream of the crop, the best of the best. And many of them also had very flimsy math background that was unanticipated by the faculty. And then just completely overwhelmed. During the fall, I also had the pleasure of teaching a first year seminar to a random mixture of students, not STEM students necessarily. All of them report just being absolutely underwater, just drowning. Don't know how to organize their work life and their studying and their social life and being outside their house for the first time in 2 years, and their parents aren't there. Like, they're just completely overwhelmed before they even show up in class, you know? So I just wanted to throw this little bit in here, right? I'm going to quote Stand and Deliver, the actual movie, right? I'm trying to figure out how to help them. And so from Stand and Deliver, the teacher asks the student, do you want me to do it for you? The student says yes. And the teacher says, well, you're supposed to say no, right? As a millennial, I'm going to also quote the South Park episode that made fun of this movie. And in that episode, Cartman is the teacher, and he's always lamenting, like, how do I reach these kids, right? I don't know, right? I'm pretty new to teaching, and this is a pretty weird situation with these students and the COVID situation. So I was reading, I was talking to people, I was doing everything I could to try to figure out how I get them to buy in, right? Big struggle. So what I decided was I was going to do what I do and provide them with as many tools as possible and just kind of see what they found useful, right? So some of the tools, I have the lecture videos, right, which are posted. They can watch an infinity number of times if they want to. As a flipped lecture, that's true for every class. I created worksheets with keys So I would give them the worksheets, which I wrote those problems. So they would be similar to what would be on my exams. Later towards the exam, right, when we were reviewing for the exam, I would post the keys so they could double check their work. I created exam reviews, which were more practice problems, also with keys. I created study guides, which were basically just learning objectives for each exam. I also told them that those basically come directly from their textbook. But even though we say that we require the textbook, definitely can confirm not all students actually purchase the textbook. Again, the Google Jamboards for literally 24/7 questions, thoughts, put whatever you want on there. One-on-one office hours and weekly meetings. Some students requested to have a standing meeting every single week at the same time. If they asked me to and I didn't have other things going on, I did it, even outside of my scheduled office hours, because they have weird schedules. Many of them play sports, they have jobs, they have other obligations. So I met many, many times outside of office hours. Again, the Chem 101 or now active homework problems. Chem 101 daily warm-up problems, which I mentioned. I also put together lists of exam review problems. So basically just more example problems from all the chapters that would be on each exam. Purely practice, ungraded. They could do it as much as they wanted to, no risks. I also did a review class period in class for each exam, the class period before the exam, and I did an optional Zoom review session, which I recorded and posted for them if they couldn't be there, usually around 7 p.m. 2 nights before the exam, so they would have time to watch the video if they couldn't be there in person. And of course, at a college campus, we have an academic success center, which does peer tutoring. They have academic coaches so that the students can not only work on the content, but also their strategies for studying, how they approach exams, how to organize their lives, things like that, right? So, I mean, I was just throwing everything at the wall to see what they would find useful, because I know how I study. I'm a pencil and paper kind of girl, but who knows, right? I'm not one of them. So we'll just see how it goes. Yeah, so you can guess probably how that went. My students, this is a meme that I picked out, but this is how they feel. I know it is, right? They just don't know. They don't know how to approach it, right? I try to demonstrate for them. I try to encourage them to use these tools. Were they not? How do I even know, right? If they're using them. Now on our LMS, I can see on the videos, for example, that are required for every class, I can see who's clicked it and who hasn't. And I can tell you it became apparent pretty quickly that about 50% of my students never watched the videos, or at least not before they were supposed to in class, right? Maybe by the exam. But there were a good handful who never watched a video all semester long. You can probably guess what their grades were like, but that's another issue. Anyway, as they were taking their first exam, I sat there watching them and I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, I've done all these things, but like, how can I know what they need more of or what is totally not something they're interested in? The obvious answer to me was to ask them, right? So what I did is I made post-exam surveys. So these are some of the questions I asked, right? So these are examples from exam 2. The content was fair based on the material covered in lecture and in class. That one got them on exam 1 because 97% of them said my exam 1 was fair, but then they complained when their grades weren't good. And I showed them the numbers, like, gotcha. I probably shouldn't have played my hand that early because then, you know, things were different after that. But yeah, I was like, you said it was fair. Literally right after you took the test, you said it was fair. So yeah, anyway. Which of the following did they use, right? And that would be that list of all those things that I mentioned earlier. Which one of those tools was the most helpful, right? Out of that same list. What could I have done better as their professor? What could they have done better? And then what changes would they like to see to the course, right? So Many of those are open response. And again, they are happy to share their thoughts and feelings. So I learned a lot of things. Now, some of their suggestions, obviously, we're not going to do that, right? Sometimes they just needed to vent, which I tried very hard not to take personally. But, find the useful information and leave the rest. But honestly, many of them had a lot of really good ideas and a lot of good feedback. Oh, and then after exam 1, I would ask, what have you changed about your study habits since the last exam? And so often the answers to that, even all the way through the whole year of Gen Chem, the answers were, I spent more time on it before the exam. I studied longer, right? I didn't wait till the last minute, which good, right? I'm glad you're taking my advice on that. Anywho, so unfortunately for Gen Chem 1, I just was doing it for me. It didn't really occur to me that that would be a useful tool for anybody else, because again, I'm very early in my career. But as I chatted with my colleagues about it, they got really excited about the idea of getting feedback on these post-exam surveys. And some of them asked me, if they could see my questions, if they could use that idea. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, right? But because I had no IRB, I cannot share that feedback that they gave me with anybody else, because I never told them that I might do that. Right. So that's top secret is how I'll put it. But I did apply for an IRB beginning spring 2022. So I do have information I can share with you from Gen Chem 2. Right. And now most of these are students I had in Gen Chem 1. So they were familiar with the surveys. On the first day of class in Gen Chem 2, I gave them the consent form for them to sign. Oh, an IRB. So that stands for the Internal Review Board at the college or wherever you work. It basically, if you're going to have human subjects, you have to go through a process of getting your research, right? Your proposed project approved. So that I'm not out here just terrorizing people in the name of Springfield College. That's probably not a good situation. So in order to do pedagogical research where I report the results of surveys that humans responded to, you have to have that IRB approval first, so that your participants are aware of what they're participating in. That's a great question. Great. So I got my IRB for spring 2022. And it will continue into this next school year. So this is the beginning of this project, but I've already seen some interesting things. So let's get into that. So first, how did I do this? We have a Center for Education, Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship on campus, and the director who runs that's amazing. So he helped me a lot in writing my first IRB proposal, because I'm a chemist. I've never done anything like that. I don't normally have human subjects. As was mentioned earlier, I'm a computational chemist, so I work with computers. They don't have to give me permission. But he was great. That was very helpful. So I designed the informed consent document. All the students signed it, right? They had the opportunity to opt out. But because it was completely anonymous, all the surveys were always completely anonymous, and it had absolutely no bearing on their grade, no bonus points, no nothing. They were not required to participate in it. I just told them, if you don't want to sign, that's fine. Just don't do any of the surveys, right? Or if there comes a point you don't want to do them anymore, you don't have to, right? But I definitely kind of got them roped into the feeling that they were helping me do research that I could share with other teachers, which I think they found really interesting. I did start the semester with a beginning of semester assessment to capture where the students were coming into Chem 122. And that just had some questions, about, in your previous chemistry experience, what kind of tools did you use, things like that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Because not all of my kids in Gen Chem 2 were in my Gen Chem 1, right? And some of them were retaking it from another college or whatever. So yeah, it was just good to get that baseline. I officially formalized the questions I used on the post-exam surveys, but they basically stayed the same as they were before. And then I added one more question on the final exam survey, which is, what advice would you give to future students enrolling in Gen Chem 1 for the first time? And so I plan on sharing some of those responses with my incoming freshmen and my incoming students this year. So here's my results, some of my results from the pre-semester survey. And so here's all the different things I suggested as, you know, which of these things do you use when you're studying for chemistry, right? So worksheets created by the professor, because my students knew I wrote those and I write the exams, that was definitely something they leaned on, because one of their big gripes is that the Chem 101, the active chemistry homework, is harder than my exams, which, like, that's good, right? Like, shouldn't it be that way? But anyway, they much preferred to do that rather than going back over their homework, because they felt reassured somehow that I had written that, so it was more important. And then many of them reported going over and making notes based on the textbook and the videos that they watch. I hope that's true. I'm not sure if they say that because they think I want them to, though. You know what I mean? So anyway, this was just kind of touching base. Most of them were not using tutoring through the Academic Success Center, which is a bummer because it's a free resource. Like, why not, right? Yeah, so kind of a smattering. Many of them do not rewatch the assigned course videos, and I wasn't surprised by that because several of them never watched them the first time, right? So, yikes. All right, so this is post-exam 4. And one thing I want to point out is, if you look at the y-axis here, I had pretty good student feedback. My total number of students in the spring was about 80. So almost half of them responded to the voluntary survey, totally anonymous voluntary survey. But as you can see, that number drops off a lot towards the end of the semester. First of all, this is after their final exam. At that point, they have completely divorced themselves from their chemistry experience. So understandable to an extent. So yeah, it would be great to get higher numbers, but it is what it is for now. I'm working on that. So this is the result for what they've been using, right? What they found most useful towards the end of the year. So this is a whole year of us asking these questions and talking about the options. Again, the worksheets, they really want that one-on-one, like, I wrote the problem, you do the problem, this is what the exam is going to be like. Many of them use the Chem 101 practice problems because they were completely practice, ungraded, which surprised me because most of them don't like the homework assignments, but they come from the same place, right? So I don't know. That's something to think about there. But I guess the fact that maybe there wasn't a grade associated with it, or I don't know. I thought the practice problems were honestly harder than the homework assignments because I used many of the easier questions for their homework assignments, but okay. Many of them, again, reporting using the videos on Brightspace, and the students who got to the end of Gen Chem 2 with me, many of them were. Very few people were not watching the videos anymore at that point. But something I found interesting is we had a project where I had the students pick a chapter from the semester, and they would get 2 glossary terms and a practice problem they had to create a definition for. And then I would share it with everybody, and literally none of them used, like, I would post it, right, for them to look at, and none of them used it the entire semester. So I will not be doing that project again because grading it was painful. Me uploading their responses was painful, and they never even looked at it. So at least that's something for me in the future to avoid. Great question. So their warm-up assignments, I encourage them to work in groups in class. Honestly, their homework assignments too, I encourage them to work together if they want to. Very few things I ask them to do completely on their own. And of course, we have activities and things like that in the flipped lecture as well that I encourage them to do in small groups. I get the feeling based on conversations I've had that a lot of them do the practice problems by themselves. But again, many of those students are like my high achieving students anyway, who are going above and beyond, even though they probably don't need to. So yeah, I encourage them mostly because I want them to study together to do a lot of group work in class.
So the practice problems are the practice problems are the problems they solve in classroom, like theoretical and mathematical.
So the warm-up assignments are the ones we do in class together. These practice problems are just another assignment they can choose to work on if they want to online outside of class. I don't look at them. I don't grade them. During the exam reviews, if people have questions about them, then we can talk about them. But typically I don't even look at those problems.
And do they do any project together, like a PBL, project-based learning?
I don't have them do a group project. I have them do an independent project, which is this glossary entry project. They did not find useful. During Gen Chem 1, I had them make an infographic about a topic from a chapter. They liked that a lot more because many of them would come up with like cute ways of remembering some of the concepts. And so they would share that, and that was much more interesting. But yeah, having them just do glossary entries to make a glossary for the class they could all access, none of them did that. I assume because you could Google and get that information much more quickly, right? So yeah, so maybe this year doing some kind of group project would be good. I just worry, knowing that their course load is pretty heavy and many of them are in sports and or have jobs, I try not to give them a lot of group thing to do outside of class time, because they just have a hard time coordinating all of that. And I worry about one student doing all the work and then the other ones don't actually learn anything, that kind of thing.
So I was giving one of my students who was studying high school chemistry some project to do for each and every concept I was teaching. So he kind of, did some experiment at home using home material and some, do online, and he started making PowerPoints, and so he kind of was learning, by doing also. So that worked out very well. But yeah, I think doing a group project, students tend to not get involved at the same pace, so that kind of decreases retention. But
right.
Yeah, I understand the point.
Yeah, in my chemistry survey class, which is for non-science majors, I do a group project because I find that it helps them get more engaged. But these students have really, really heavy course loads in my general chemistry class. And so, yeah, I just worry about overloading them with things that they will find it hard to schedule. Yeah. Thank you for your question. All right, so some of the written feedback, right? When I asked them when I asked them to describe how they prepare, these are copied and pasted, right? So if there are typos, they're from my students. So they review the study sheet of material, they go over their notes, they go over practice problems and watch the videos online. Again, many of these are coming from the very last set of post-exam surveys, right? And so they talk about a lot of the things, right? They figured it out. These are all the things I want them to be doing. And it took time. It took time to evolve to that place, right? Yes, I'll go ask my professor questions. So now, how do I get them there faster? This was a great one, right? I study for an hour or two for a few days before the exam and actually make sure to sleep before the exam. So clearly we've found some decent habits, right? Again, it took time. And then I typically do majority of my studying the night before, work through optional practice problems, review key concepts. And they know that they should be studying sooner, but competing priorities, I guess. So it's interesting to get that feedback. I think sharing these quotes with my future students will be helpful, because if I tell my students, you should be studying earlier, you should get more sleep, you should go over practice problems, they're not going to listen, right? But if it's coming from a peer, maybe they're more likely to take it seriously. And then, of course, not all of the feedback is super positive, right? Practice, cry, practice, go over everything time and time again. So I'm definitely not saying I've refined or perfected any kind of process for them, but knowing that that's still happening, that gives me, that motivation to try to find a way to get to them sooner, right? Before they just spiral down this, I'm just doing the same thing over and over and nothing's helping, right? So some pre-semester survey written feedback, right? I asked them these questions, but honestly, I'm not even going to report what they said, because they told me what they thought I expected them to say. And that is frustrating, right? So I'm not sure yet how to actually get them to tell me the truth. Does that make sense? So stay tuned, pending, right? I will update you all in a year when I've done this for another year and have more info. But I think I really need to stress to them verbally that I want the blunt and honest truth. It is truly anonymous. Tell me the real story, because I can't help you do better or change your habits if you won't tell me what's really going on, right? So pending. And then finally, just some thoughts, right? Part of it is me evolving, right? I have changed the way I write exams. I've done a lot of things based on their feedback. For example, their multiple choice questions were always terrible results for the whole class. So I took those out and I replaced them with something else with their feedback, right? So yeah, some things were me. The multiple choice questions, apparently the ones I write are not good, right? They felt the exams were too long. A lot of that was their time management, but I also tried to reel it back, right? The format and structuring of class time, what we spent time doing versus other things they didn't find that helpful. We did a lot more case studies during Gen Chem 2 instead of just working problems, because they need that storyline, right? To throw us back to our chat on Tuesday. They need that running dialogue instead of just like, here's a problem, how do I solve it? Or is it them, right? So this is a quote from one of the students, right? So their speed and their pacing for practicing when doing problem solving, they noticed that many of their peers are behind when it comes to efficiently getting through solving these problems. And so it causes lots of them to not be able to finish most of the tests because it takes them too long to solve the problems. So they know some of the things they need to work on. And we talked about those things in class quite often. And then another student quote, I should have, like usual, reviewed concept questions more because they always get me. They tend to think if I can solve the math problem, that's all I need for a good grade. And they totally lose sight of the science, right? Of the story, of the ideas. But is that a me problem, right? So maybe I am focusing too much on working the problems and not building in ways for them to practice telling the story of what's happening. So that again is going to go back and change the way I'm going to approach, especially in Gen Chem 1, when you have those foundational concepts. How am I structuring class time to encourage them to put together those ideas in a way that they can share verbally, instead of just encouraging them to do the math problems, especially if they're not watching the videos, so they haven't heard the story, right? that's another, yeah, we'll see. All right, so there are some future things I want to address, like improving the number of students participating in those surveys, but it's anonymous and completely unrelated to their grading, which I think is important. So I don't know, how do you get them to do it if you can't reward them for doing it, right? So that's something I'm thinking about. So if you have ideas, let me know. And then this coming year, right, I'll be doing the surveys again. But this time I'm going to have a student instructional assistant in one of my chemistry sections, but not the other. I teach 60-seat general chemistry sections. So having a student instructional assistant to go around and help them with problems and talk to them about concepts, I think will be super useful, but we could only get one of them. So I guess we'll see if that makes any difference in how they're using materials or what they found actually useful. And the student who is going to be my SIA is one of my students from last year. So they are familiar with all of the different materials I provide. And with that, that was long, but yeah, so that is what I have for the presentation. I am going to share again just to see if we got any new stuff on the Jamboard. But yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. Oh, I have question. College chemistry students at Bard College completed a dry lab research project and presented in the form of a poster. Yeah, I like that. I don't know how many students are in your class, but with 60 students in a class, it's really hard to let them have time to present. But maybe I could do something like have them make a short recording and post that. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. I do have them do discussion boards where they comment on each other's ideas. But it's hard. And my survey, my Chem 101, which is a survey class for us, there's 100 students in that class. So it's hard to find that time. Yeah.
I had 8 students only, and I was teaching the ESL students in China. And so I wanted to do something different by which they get time, to practice what they're learning and improve their written skills. So, like I was teaching a concept, they were doing some research. So they started, with an element. So it shows an element and they started exploring it more theoretically. And then, ways to purify it, some of the chemical reactions they go under. And then towards the end, what would be the purpose of using this element in future. So that was like more attractive for them. And throughout the course of 5 months, they were quite engaged. Yeah, so I only had 8 students, so they got the opportunity to present the poster. It was an e-poster, so didn't have to, spend time printing a lot of it.
Yeah, that's great. When I teach analytical, normally I have less than 10 students. So that's when we do those kinds of, I usually have them pick an instrument and do like a whole report that they share with the class. I have not considered using POGL activities. Honestly, I'm still, so in grad school for chemistry, absolutely 0% of your time is spent learning how to teach. So that's why I joined NEACT. So let me advertise for NEACT, right? I am continuously learning so much and trying desperately to incorporate it in what can be a very stuffy subject in a college classroom. So yeah, I would definitely be happy to look into some POGL. I do use a lot of activities that I find on like ChemEdX and things like that in my classes, because other teachers have done really great work and I appreciate it when it is shared with me so that my classes aren't all completely dull and uninteresting for my students. Pedagogy is definitely ignored. So Jessica's saying she made the transition from teaching college to high school. I have a couple of friends who teach at the high school level outside of NEACT, right? Other subjects in chemistry. And it's amazing how much they know about teaching, but that's yeah, you would think that there'd be more preparation for some of us in post-secondary, but it's okay. We get there. That's why we have things like our CETLs on campus to help us learn that stuff. Yes, so Kristen mentioned that after this year's chemistry AP Chem exam, she had her students go through last year's multiple choice questions and use them to write new questions. I do occasionally have my students work in groups to write example questions. Like when I realized the multiple choice was really not going well this year, I had them work in groups to write multiple choice questions and swap them with other groups so they could like take their mini quizzes and then swap them back for the students who wrote them to grade them. And I used some of those multiple choice questions that the students had proposed, the ones that were, you know, kind of the most popular topics, and it still was pretty bleak. So I just got rid of them. I've determined there's something wrong with the way I write multiple choice. So forget it, right? Like I would rather them be able to actually demonstrate their knowledge by explaining something or drawing a diagram or whatever, right? Okay, yeah, I'll look into the POGL stuff from Flynn. That sounds interesting.
The ones available from Flynn are the general high school chemistry and the AP chemistry books. There are also college level POGL books, one written by the guys at Franklin and Marshall. There's another series written by Stony Brook. Those are the people who originally created POGLs, but I can't remember who the publishers are because all my stuff is at school. There are also POGL books written specifically for like GOB chemistry classes for your nursing students, but they're worth every penny.
Yeah, I definitely would like to collect some more information about GOB. I've taught a couple of conceptual survey things, but the students I have are really mixed. So actually some of the students in that class are athletic training majors or exercise science. So they are more science oriented and it's a requirement for their major. And then the other half of the class are business, finance, English, like it's just a core class for them. So it's a delicate dance to get through all the content they need in a semester, but also not completely overwhelm the non.
But you wouldn't, I mean, unless you're going to run your class as a POGL class, you could drop POGL activities in like, okay, well, I hope everyone watched the video, but maybe they didn't. But this, you know, I'm choosing this one particular POGL activity because it does a great job of, say, building up that conceptual knowledge and throw some good problems in at the end.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I wouldn't recommend that you used it every class meeting, but you
Right.
might use it once a week or once every other week because, oh, well, this is a great activity and it fits in perfectly. You know?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. I will definitely look into that. So Kayla said she's flipping her Gen Chem class this year. For my videos, do I do multiple short individual topic videos or a single lecture that I would do in class? That's a great question. When I first started teaching during the fall of 2020, I had never recorded myself or edited myself in a video. I had no idea what I was doing. So my thought was, well, if they're going to watch it like a lecture and then show up in class and we'll discuss it and work problems, I'll just record the length of the lecture. That's a terrible idea. 100% don't do that. Students have extremely short attention spans, especially now in the day of TikTok. A lot of educators and pedagogical researchers are talking about that. If it's more than honestly 3 minutes long, they really struggle. I try to keep my videos 20 minutes or less. So basically what I do is for every class day, I'll say what sections of the chapter we're going to cover. And then I record my videos section by section in the textbook. That's how I do it. And I put in my practice problems in there and all that good stuff. But I tell them, like, it's recorded so you can pause it. If you need to go back and hear me say it again, do that. If you want to skip the example problems and just get the content and then watch the examples later, do that, right? Figure out what works for you. But yeah, if it's more than 10 minutes long, they will struggle. So if you can make it smaller bites, I recommend it. But then on the flip side, if you're still giving them 50 minutes worth of lecture in 5-minute bites, then they have to watch 10 videos for a class and they get super overwhelmed. So I don't know. I definitely am not the expert on how to do the best flipped lecture, but I have completely re-recorded my Gen Chem 1 videos from the first year I taught because they were all way too long. And I didn't know how to effectively use like my iPad to write notes. It was real ugly at the beginning. I appreciate those students for hanging in there with me. We got through it together. It was a rough time.
Yeah, this is the thing that I'm struggling with. I was at BCCE here recently, went to a flipped class workshop, and I'm like, had that same struggle of, you know, if I'm gonna do 10 5-minute videos, they have to watch 10 videos.
Yeah.
And you know, I do plan to do like I don't know, an ed puzzle or something like that where I can insert questions in there to kind of force them to do it. Those low stakes points. But yeah, no, that's something I've been struggling with.
Yeah, I will not take Gen Chem back to unflipped. My students all the time, the ones who are bitter about my class, it's cool, whatever, I don't take it personally, but they're like, oh, flipped is the problem. I hate flipped. I can't be successful. Like, it's way too much work. Like, but then they go to their biology class with my bestie and they're like, oh, my biology lecture should be flipped. This is garbage. You just want what you don't have right now. And I get it. You're just looking for someone else to blame because we're early in our adulthood and we're not ready to accept our responsibility. I understand. But yeah, there's got to be a great middle zone, I would think. But if the students get intimidated, if there are a ton of individual videos, but if the video is too long, they just like completely zone out. I don't know. So I am definitely still looking to perfect or at least improve my approach to that.
I have a question. If you have, if you were to do a traditional 50-minute lecture, are you really doing 5 topics or are you doing 4 topics and then the student questions? Because like, I can't see like a 50-minute lecture, you having to make 5 short videos of it because you're more efficient giving the video than if you were doing interactive with the students.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. Most of my screen time they're expected to watch before they come to class is way below 50 minutes. Some topics, because in a video, I feel like I can go into more detail walking through examples. Some of them get a bit longer. Like the first time I teach them like balancing redox reactions and things like that, that takes time. But yeah, no, many days, even though they'll tell you they have to watch 100 hours worth of videos, many of the videos, even added together, several sections for one class period, are not 50 minutes long. Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see. Robin said this summer I created books in Moodle, embedded videos with an explanation. That's nice. And I know someone else mentioned having guided notes. I lost the comment. Where is it? Someone mentioned having guided notes for Gen Chem. I do guided notes for my survey students. Again, especially because I want them to have something structured while I'm talking for them to fill in, because many of them are not science majors or even interested in science. I haven't done that yet for my general chemistry students. And it's because I get, from the bitter students, I get a lot of feedback about like, you talk about a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. You're wasting my time, right? So if I give them a skeleton of what matters, none of the rest of that is ever going to make it to a piece of paper, you know? They're not even going to listen. They're going to skip it in the video. And some of that is the storytelling that I think is important for understanding why those concepts matter. So I have not gone to guided notes for general chemistry. I do give them, you know, the layout of the main topics from each chapter for them to focus on. But I don't know, I guess I expect them to be a little more structured than that. But I find, yeah, this incoming class, they have no note-taking skills. They have no idea how to organize information. Yeah. Okay, Robin. Yeah. A study sheet, a summary sheet. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll try something different this year with the way I give them the learning objectives. My biology colleagues give them literal lists of learning objectives for each chapter in each section. And I haven't been delivering that as formally, but they seem to be receptive to that. So I may try that. And then like a list of like the kinds of problems that fit under each of those headings, you know? Oh, Jessica was the one who commented about it was AP Chem guided notes. I thought somebody earlier said Gen Chem, but anyway. First year students got really into lessons from quizzes where I had built in questions after every few slides. I really want to go back and do some of that EduPuzzle quizzes, kind of like building in questions in the videos. But honestly, it is a huge amount of work. And I am providing them, as you saw in the presentation, so many things in addition to the videos that because they don't really engage in the videos as much as the worksheets, I've spent a lot more time so far focusing on the worksheets. But now I've got a really great set of worksheets with keys. So maybe this year I'll be able to do more of changing up the way the videos are done. Yes, Robin, that's something I'm really thinking about. So Robin mentioned that they stopped giving tests last year in Gen Chem 1 and changed it to mastery skills. I really want to be able to do that. I've watched so many interesting presentations on like redo and ungrading and changing things to mastery or like earning badges or something like that. I have so many students that I just don't know that I can give each of them enough attention for them to kind of do a do-it-your-own pace thing. So I'm trying to build in small pieces that are sort of ungrading or redo, where like they do the assignment, I give them feedback but not a grade, and then they're allowed to edit it based on the feedback to obtain the mastery of that assignment. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I am thinking about doing something like that with the exams I'm giving them a redo. The problem is I normally don't let them have their exams back. I let them see them in my office so we can talk about them one-on-one. But knowing the students I have and having heard about them from my colleagues also, I fear that if I give back the exams, this year's class would have just memorized what was on my exam last year, and I rewrite my exams every year. I'm still evolving how I write them. So if they just memorize an old thing, I worry that that's going to damage their progress, you know? Right. It only took 20 years to get to this. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm trying really hard to move really fast to something that's perfect. And I know that that's not, there is no perfect, right? We're all just growing. But yeah, I'm definitely, if anyone ever wants to chat about other grading options and things like that, I'm happy to do it. Love the feedback. I don't know, here, I'll put my email in the chat. If anybody wants to email me after the presentation. But yeah, also this meme right here, I've been staring at it the whole time. This is 100% college students, right? They just want to play with fire in the lab. They really do. Appreciate the puppy picture and what looks like a beautiful drawing here. I love these personality quiz things, right? They're so fun.
And there are a bunch of them for chemistry. They're hysterical.
Yeah, there are some really good ones. my students, oh my gosh, one day we were doing something and a couple of the students ended the activity. We were using Jamboard. And so they like, because you can do this too. You can come over here and like go to a blank slide. And they just started like making their own drawings and putting memes in there about like their chemistry professor making them learn 8 weeks worth of material in 3 days. Like, I just laughed. They laughed, like, you know. Yeah, so you can, maybe you can see this if I do it. So if you do add image and then Google search, you can search for chemistry meme. Most likely what you find if you're searching within Jamboard will be pretty tame, should be pretty PG. So like this is a classic one, right? So that's chemistry cat. 2 men walk into a bar, one orders H2O, the second says, I'll have some H2O too. The second man died, right? Because it's peroxide. If you're really looking for the good memes, you'll open a different browser tab and search chemistry memes elsewhere, and then you can find way better ones. It really filters what you can get from inside here. But then you can just copy and paste that. Like that's what I had to do to get this chemistry cat one. I had to go outside of this little searchy bar. But yeah, the students in this age, maybe it's cheesy. I don't know. I know memes are sort of a millennial thing, but the current generation, the Gen Zs, can also speak that language. So many of them, even on their phones and on their laptops, they have memes at the ready that they're sharing behind your back anyway. So if you give them an opportunity, man, they love it. And honestly, it's a little bit of a stress break for them too. Like, they make jokes, they do weird drawings, they whatever. I just tell them to keep it clean and they just have a blast. And if that helps, especially because my class is at 8 a.m. and that's a hard time for college students, like if that helps them start their day, cool, that's fine. As long as they're doing the work I asked, I don't care. Cool.
Any other questions?
See if there was anything else from the
I think we covered all the questions that popped up in the chat or all the comments. I didn't see anything that we hadn't addressed.
yeah, I'm just looking at the registration sheet to see if there was anything on there. Honestly, I guess a couple of the responses of things people were hoping to learn is like how to help their students with studying. Honestly, I really prefer to have one-on-one meetings with students when they're struggling with studying. And I ask them, okay, tell me honestly what you do. Tell me what feels like it's helping and what feels like it's not. And then I just come up with more ideas, right? Do you want more practice sheets? I can help you find resources online. Does talking to another person help? You should probably study in a group, right? I think that's a more flexible thing you can do in a college classroom. You know, in high school, you don't have as much time to like get them to do small groups and stuff like that outside of class, maybe.
I think just encouraging them to use active strategies. Doing things, like you have to do things. You can't just read your book. You can't just do, I call it pretend studying. Like you have to actually be writing something, drawing something, practicing, talking. Like you have to be using the material and just pointing out some of those different strategies as you go, you know, early in the year. It makes a difference. Oh, there's a comment in the chat from Laura. To practice. That's a good one, Laura.
Right. So
to practice pacing by timing themselves when they take tests.
Right. Several of my students have asked for like a practice test. So I'm considering maybe giving them the test from last year, this year as a practice test, even though I will tweak it a little bit because some of them were a little too long. But they should be practicing timing themselves, solving the problems in general, I think. So I don't know. One thing I will definitely say, especially I have like a secret librarian background. there's a lot of great information online and the students are good at finding it, but they are not good at figuring out what's good and what's not good. So I spend a lot of time telling them, if you want more stuff to practice, ask me. And I will give you more links. I'll post it for the whole class on Brightspace, especially when we're doing things like inorganic chemistry naming conventions and things like that. Most of the stuff, if you Google coordination compounds, that's at a way higher level than they are capable of. So I need to be the filter to help them find practice that's appropriate. Otherwise, they will just be completely snowballed. So there does need to be a dialogue. So 100%, my biggest take home message, get them to talk to you however you can, right? Get them to give you some feedback on what's working and what's not. And it's not easy to do. But I ended up with a pretty good core group of students who were very open to that. They were in my office all the time. They were very blunt about what was going on with them and what was working and what wasn't, chemistry and beyond. But yeah, get them to give you that feedback, because I don't know what it's like to learn chemistry in 2022. I learned it years ago. I think you're muted, Kristen.
Sorry, it's 2:20 and we've been talking for a long time and I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we can leave this open for a little bit longer. But I hope you found it useful. I very much want to thank Ashley for her presentation today. She gave us a lot of ideas to think about as we, are starting our new school year ourselves. And I hope that you come to future NEACT events. You can sign up for them at NEACT.org. And like I said, we can keep it open for a few minutes, but I think we've had a really good discussion. I'm glad everyone could come.
Thank you all so much.